Hi, welcome to Talking and Reading from Japan. I'm your host, Hidemi Woods. Here, I'm reading episodes from the books I wrote and talk about them or anything that pops up in my mind. I hope you enjoy with me. Today, I'll read an episode from my book titled An Old Tree in Kyoto. Today's episode I'm reading is called The War Reward Certificate. It's about my late grandfather's certificate that he had treasured all his life. The War Reward Certificate. I answered the phone from my grandfather on my mother's side one day when I was in junior high. I sensed something wrong at once from his unusually somber tone. He wanted to talk to my mother, and she began to tell him repeatedly to wait right there. My grandfather called her to let her know he was going to kill himself. He picked up the payphone at the train station before he took a train to a place where he had chosen to die and said goodbye to my mother. My father rushed into the car to get to the station while my mother stayed home in case my grandfather called again. My father caught him at the station, asked him what was going on, and persuaded him not to take the train. As he didn't want to return home, my father checked him in at a hotel near the station. My mother joined there and they talked him out of killing himself. She came home at night and told me what had happened. As an old custom in Japan, a married couple used to live with the spouse's parents. My grandparents on my mother's side lived with their another daughter and her husband, and they had tackled everyday arguments and disputes. The center of their domestic troubles was often my grandmother. She finally got mad at my grandfather, who had always steered himself away the troubles and stayed out of quarrels. He was a war veteran of World War II and had a reward certificate from the government. She picked it up, said, "Is this piece of paper making you some kind of honorable man?" and tore it before his eyes. Without saying a word, he left home for Atami, which was a Japanese popular seaside resort where my grandparents once visited on their honeymoon. Thankfully, he ended up staying at a hotel with my father instead of committing suicide there. When my grandmother called my mother about his disappearance that night, my mother made her worry all night to punish her by telling a lie that she didn't know his whereabouts. Next day, he calmed down and went home safely. He just told my grandmother he had been in Atami for sightseeing, that she had believed until she died. He was always a quiet, gentle, tolerant man who never seemed suicidal. The war reward certificate must have meant a lot to him, probably a token of his desperate survival for his beloved wife. His choice of a place to die showed their honeymoon was the best time of his life. That was today's episode. It was one of my memories about my favorite grandfather on my mother's side. He was such a gentle, kind, calm, quiet man. And I really, really liked him. People like him as well. He was a likable man, and because he was although he was a quiet man, everybody liked him, so much so that he once became a mayor of a small town where he lived. And my grandparents was a nice couple, a happily married couple who got along well each other so much. In those days, not so many couples were happily married because they used to get married by an arranged marriage. So it was not marriage like it is now, but one of the tools to connect families, to make ties between families for families' interest. But uniquely, my grandparents on my mother's side were married, not specifically by arranged marriage, but my grandfather fell in love with my grandmother, who was a distant relative of his. And my grandmother didn't have her parents. I mean, never lived with her parents because her mother was a geisha and she didn't know who her father was. And her mother, who used to be geisha, she died when she gave of birth to my grandmother. So she did neither of her parents. And she didn't have home. So distant relatives were taking her in turns. And one of the houses she temporarily lived was my grandfather's. And while she was staying there, my grandfather fell in love with her, I think. And after a few years later, after they became grown-ups, my grandfather wanted her to be his wife, and he asked his parents to allow him to be married with her. And they got married. And I had never seen them having a fight even once. They just such a nice couple. So when the event in this episode happened, I felt so strange because I thought they never fought each other. And them having a fight sounded so unusual or weird. And so I imagined something really bad must have happened between them. Otherwise, they didn't fight. Although they themselves never fought, inside their family, fights were rampant because they were multi-generation family, according to an old Japanese custom. So my grandparents lived with their daughter and their son-in-law and their children. And so 3 generations lived together in a big house. And they were a farming family. They were farmers. And my grandparents had retired from farming long before, and their daughter and their son-in-law were taking up the family business and did the farming. But the problem was my grandmother controlled everything. She tried to intervene every single thing her daughter and son-in-law was doing. So she basically didn't allow their own way. She just tried to continue her way. And so she kept instructing how to farm as the family. But inevitably, my grandmother's daughter or the son-in-law wanted to work in their way, but my grandmother didn't allow it. And fights occur almost every day regarding the work or anything, how to raise children. So she just kept stepping in the family matters, and it's conflicted between two different generations, and they argued, disputed, quarreled every day. But as a wise man, my grandfather managed to keep distant from those fights. He just tried to stay in his own room as much as he could, and didn't tell them what to do. As like my grandmother did. So my grandfather repeatedly advised my grandmother not to intervene them. He tried to persuade my grandmother to let them do what they want for farming. But my mother simply couldn't stop intervening, and she ignored my grandfather's advice and constantly intervened her daughter's way. And I suppose that particular day, my grandmother reached the point where she couldn't take it any longer, and she took it out to my grandfather. And she got hysterical, maybe, and she blamed my grandfather that she was the only person who tried to make the family business go well, while my grandfather didn't care about it at all. And that's why fights occurred. But for my grandmother, she was trying to the right thing for her family business. And she was always swallowed into all those disputes and quarrels. But my grandfather was distant and stayed in his room as if nothing was happening in the family. And she got mad, got hysterical, blamed him, and tore the war reward certificate in front of him. That certificate was issued by the Japanese government when my grandfather returned home from World War II. It was kind of a government paper to show gratitude to a war veteran. And my grandfather treasured it, so he framed it. It was like a big poster, and he framed it and put it up in his room. But that day, when my grandmother was so angry at him, at his indifference to the family disputes, she took it down. She took that reward certificate down, unframed, and tore it before his eyes. I suppose that certificate was much more important than we all thought. And he just looking at my grandmother tearing it, he left home. He decided to kill himself. I think that certificate was more than a proof of government's gratitude or proof of his survival. I guess it was something much bigger to him, like he came home, he returned from the war just for my grandmother. Grandmother was the center of his hope during the war, to survive. He returned 9 years after the war, after he got initially drafted to the war. So it took him 9 years to come home. And I once heard from him that it was much more harder in a camp as a POW than in a battle itself. He battled in China during World War II, but soon he became a POW in Siberia, in Russia. And he spent about 5 years or more in that camp as a POW. And that experience was the hardest of his life as a soldier. Because according to him, surviving in a camp was much more difficult than in a battle. First of all, it was Siberia, where the cold was severe, and so his fellow soldiers died one after another every day from the cold. And also they were shot by Russian soldiers for fun. And many Japanese soldiers died in a camp, and he saw it every day, and it was easy for him to think it was his turn the next morning who died. But he tried so hard to come back to my grandmother, and he succeeded to do that and received the reward certificate. So I think that was for him it was a proof to survive for my grandmother. But she herself tore it by saying that that piece of paper meant nothing, and he couldn't take it, and he decided to kill himself. He was such a calm man, so I had never seen him get emotional. So being suicidal was the last thing that suits him. So that incident must have been so critical to him. But thankfully, he changed his mind and didn't kill himself, didn't go to Atami even going there was didn't happen. So he just spent one night at a hotel near the station and came home. But my grandmother thought he went to Atami for sightseeing because my mother tricked her. My mother told a lie to my grandmother for punishment, and she didn't tell the truth that he had stayed at a hotel, but she said to my grandmother that she didn't know his whereabouts. So when my grandfather came home, he told my grandmother that he went to Atami for sightseeing, and my grandmother had believed that until she died. And when she heard that my grandfather's story to go to Atami for sightseeing, she called my mother and told her that that lie to my mother. And my mother listened to her as pretending she didn't know. And my grandmother said, going to Atami for sightseeing, it was so funny of him. He's such a strange man. He is so funny, she said. And my mother laughed together on the phone, pretending not knowing anything. Eventually, after that, they never fought again. And in late years,